see these DTI measures even when you have improvements in skill, as you would over the course of a season.
Well, the changes that I put up there are speculated because we don't have a way to biopsy the brain and look to see exactly whether the changes that we're purporting correlate with axonal loss. I think the work that was done in animal models by Christine McDonald did demonstrate those relationships. So it's not a stretch to say that the changes that we're seeing in humans correlate to these axonal patterns. But without tissue, I mean, yes, there isn't going to be a good way to tell you that 100%. And in terms of in function, we did see changes in function acutely. It's harder to see changes in function correlate with the recovery patterns. These are very subtle cognitive changes, so I don't know that we even have a way to pick them. To pick up some of the the cognitive testing that we do correlates with this, but even that's pretty crude. I mean, it's more likely that this is the kind of thing that's happening year in and year, almost at a subclinical level is what we would speculate, until there's probably some critical threshold that's reached where things become clinically evident. And I think that's why we think this is important, that this is harder for us to show that these are clinically relevant. It may be something that builds up year in, year out, and maybe this is the thing that is contributing to CTE 10, 15, or 20 years later when things do become more clinically obvious. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Kevin? And if we do have other committee members with questions, it might save time. Just go ahead and pick a mic and come on and stand up behind it.
I have two questions. I'm
Kevin
Walter.
Again, identify yourself for the listeners.
Sure. Kevin Walter, sports medicine doc at Medical College of Wisconsin. First one is for Dr. McAllister. You mentioned in Turner's article that looked at if they were plus or minus ApoE. And previously with genetics, you had mentioned the confounding factors of being well controlled for all the issues that can also cause concussion. In your opinion, is that article well controlled for the other factors?
I think no. Not because it was I think it's good for what it was, but if you really think in terms of the multiple dimensions that we're talking for. Now, in fairness, they had a more limited question, which is, was there risk for concussion? Did you happen to have more concussions as a function of this particular genotype? So that probably requires less rigorous controls than the point that I was making about some of the other studies going forward.
Perfect. I have one more for all of you guys. S100B, I know there's been more research focused on the adult population. How much of that is in pediatric, MTI, and answer, but as far as pediatric sport-related concussion? So how much pediatric data is there that S100B correlates with MTBI?
Not nearly as much. There is some, but not in the realm of sports-related concussion. It's difficult. You guys know all the research-related issues related to children, but more with youth, high school. But that's certainly an area that needs to be filled. And the baseline levels of S100B do change with age. They get higher as you get younger, but probably not until you get below 14 or so. So ostensibly shouldn't make too much of a difference after the age of 14, but you're right to point that there's a gap.
Susan Margulies, also on the panel, and University of Pennsylvania. My question is for Tom. I would like you to speculate a little bit about how you think we should use the genetic information. And it's not to me whether we should be thinking of it in terms of risk and who should play. Should players be tested in the future, not play a sport if they have a particular genetic risk that's been identified? Whether it's in detection, we do a blood test, this person has been exposed to something, and so therefore we should do a diffusion testing scan on them, or whether you think it's cost management for patients. Tell me a bit about how, as the panel, we should not only say there's data here, but help interpret it in terms of its usefulness?
Good question. I think first of all, in my view, there is not enough data out there to be able to say that if you have this particular allele, you are at risk for a bad outcome. It just doesn't exist. At most, there's an association between, in the larger TBI literature, there are now a fair number of studies, each using different outcome measures, which have drawn a link between ApoE, E4, and various measures of bad outcome, but most of them are in moderate and severe injury. So at this point, I don't think there's sufficient evidence to say that if you have an E4 allele and you have concussion, you're going to be in the bad outcome group. The data just is not there. In fact, it's not there for any allele, in my view. How to think about it, I think at some point down the line, given enough data, I believe that we will be able to use genetic information to help identify risk categories of people who will either have a longer trajectory of recovery or possibly be at greater risk for adverse long-term outcomes. But we don't have that data now. In terms of whether in the future we would be able to take a young person and genotype them and say, you are a bowler and you can go play football, maybe, but that's like decades into the future. And even then, we're talking about the odds. We're not talking about this is the you are doomed gene. It's just not going to be that way. I mean, what's impressive to me is that the complex choreography of events set into motion by neurotrauma, each of which have genetic determinants, you're going to have to be in a category that has, if there are such things, alleles for many, if not all, of these different things in order to be the bad outcome person. So in many instances, how I view it currently is that this is a really interesting concept, that individual differences can impact, genetic differences can impact on aspects of outcome, but a long way from being able to interpret that in a clinically meaningful way.
Okay, in the interest of time, we'll give you the last question of this panel.
Christy Orgaz, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So the question for Jeff, you mentioned quickly that the DTI results correlated with helmet data. Can you give me more specifics of what aspect of the helmet data they correlated with?
About all of them. We looked at just every metric that we could. We looked at rotational acceleration, linear acceleration, HIT-SB, GSI.
Peak values.
We looked at peak, and even looked at peak as well as cumulative values for the, so there's too numerous. For 10 players, it was pretty impressive how many of the metrics had risk correlations with these DI changes. And it was the changes that were associated with what we speculate is axonal loss, the FA decrease, where most of those robust changes were found.
Okay, thank you very much for a quite informative first panel. We'll proceed to the next panel without a break. It's not a panel, it's a person.
Jeff is a panel all in and of himself.